You never know who you're talking to until it's too late. On a rainy Tuesday in Chicago, Officer Brody Miller thought he was just bullying another helpless driver. He thought his badge gave him the power to do whatever he wanted. He even slapped the man across the face, laughing as he handcuffed him. But Brody made one fatal mistake. The man he slapped wasn't a criminal. He was the Chief Justice of the Superior Court, the very man who signed Brody's paycheck, and the man who was scheduled to preside over Brody's promotion hearing the very next morning. This is the story of how 5 minutes of arrogance destroyed a 20-year career. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt of Lower Wacker Drive into a slick, oil-stained mirror. It was the kind of Chicago night that seeped into your bones, cold and unrelenting, inside his patrol cruiser. Officer Brody Miller adjusted the heater vents, blasting warm air onto his face. He was 45, heavy-set, with a buzz cut that was trying too hard to hide a receding hairline. He'd been on the force for 15 years, stuck in the same precinct, watching younger, smarter cops get promoted while he stayed on patrol. He blamed diversity hires. He blamed politics. He blamed everyone but himself. Quiet Night, his partner, distinctively younger and sharper, muttered from the passenger seat. Officer Martha O'Malley was new, fresh out of the academy. Still idealistic. She tapped her fingers on the laptop mount. Maybe we should head back to the precinct. Shift ends in 20. We go back when I say we go back. O'Malley, Brody snapped, his eyes scanning the dark pillars of the underpass. You rookies are always in a rush to clock out. Real police work happens in the grey hours. That's when he saw it. A sleek, vintage Mercedes-Benz 560SL, parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking rhythmically against the concrete wall. A figure was standing by the rear tire, struggling with a lug wrench. Ideally, a police officer sees a stranded motorist and thinks assistance. Brody saw the car expensive, classic, and then he saw the man. He was tall, wearing a soaked trench coat, his skin dark against the harsh yellow sodium lights of the tunnel. "Run the plate," Brody commanded, flipping on the overhead lights. The tunnel erupted in flashes of red and blue. "It's a vintage tag. Brody, it's likely just a flat tire," O'Malley said, squinting. "Let's just help him change it. I said run the plate." Brody slammed the car into park before she could answer. He didn't wait for the results. He threw his door open and stepped out into the rain, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The man by the Mercedes looked up. He was older, perhaps late 50s, with greying temples and a face carved from stone. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. "Step away from the vehicle," Brody shouted, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. The man held up the lug wrench, clearly showing what he was doing. "Officer, I have a flat. My cell service is dead down here. I'm just changing the tire." I said step away from the vehicle and drop the weapon. Brody advanced, closing the distance aggressively. "It's a lug wrench. Son, use your eyes," the man said. His voice was deep, commanding a voice used to being listened to. He set the wrench down on the pavement and wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "If you could shine a light, I'd appreciate it. This bolt is stripped." Brody didn't like the tone. He didn't like being called son, and he certainly didn't like a black man in a Mercedes telling him what to do. "Get on the ground," Brody barked, now within striking distance. "Excuse me." The man straightened up to his full height. He was taller than Brody. "I'm not getting on the ground in a tailored suit because of a flat tire. Officer, check my license plates. Check my ID. You are making a mistake." "You resisting?" Brody sneered. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it violently behind his back. "Brody! Wait!" O'Malley yelled, running up from the cruiser. "Dispatch says the car is registered to a—" "Shut up, O'Malley!" Brody shoved the man face first against the wet metal of the Mercedes. "You think you can talk down to me? You think this fancy car buys you respect? I think my position demands respect. Officer Miller," the man said, his face pressed against the cold glass. He had seen the name tag. "I'm telling you one last time. Release me, and we can discuss this like civilized men." Brody laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound. "Civilized you people are all the same, stealing cars you can't afford." The man turned his head, his eyes locking onto Brody's with a terrifying intensity. "You people, I suggest you finish that sentence very carefully," Brody snapped. The disrespect as he perceived it was too much. The frustration of his stalled career, the cold rain, the arrogance of this stranger. It all boiled over. Smack! The sound was louder than the traffic overhead. Brody backhanded the man across the face. It wasn't a tactical strike. It was a slap of pure malice. "Shut your mouth when I'm talking to you," Brody screamed. O'Malley gasped, freezing in her tracks. "Brody, what are you doing?" The man didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He slowly licked a split lip, tasting the copper tang of blood. He looked at Brody, not with fear, but with a look of absolute, icy judgment. "That," the man whispered, "was the most expensive mistake of your life." "Cuff him!" Brody yelled at O'Malley, breathing heavily. His hand was stinging from the impact. O'Malley hesitated. She looked at the man, then at Brody. She was a rookie, still on probation. Defying a senior officer could end her career before it started. But she knew this was wrong. "Brody, he hasn't done anything. The car comes back to. I don't care who it comes back to. He resisted. He assaulted an officer. Brody lied, effortless and practiced. Cuff him, or I write you up for insubordination." The man looked at O'Malley. His gaze was softer now, almost sympathetic. "Do your duty, officer. Do what he says." O'Malley stepped forward, her hands shaking as she pulled out her cuffs. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "Don't apologize," the man said calmly, as the metal ratcheted tight around his wrists. "Just remember everything you saw." Brody yanked the man away from the Mercedes, dragging him toward the cruiser. "Get in the back, and don't bleed on my upholstery." He shoved the man into the cramped back seat of the cage. The man sat upright, maintaining a dignity that seemed impossible in the back of a squad car. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't scream about brutality. He just watched Brody in the rear-view mirror. As they pulled away, leaving the Mercedes abandoned on the shoulder, Brody felt a surge of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4 Alpha, 1 male in custody, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, transporting to District 18. Copy 4 Alpha," the dispatcher crackled. "Did you secure the vehicle? That plate is flagged as—" Brody switched the radio off. "Radio's glitching," he muttered. The ride to the station was suffocatingly quiet. Usually, this was the part where the suspect begged. "Please, I have a job. Please, I can't go to jail." Brody loved that part. It fed him. But this man said nothing. He sat in the shadows, staring out at the rain-streaked city. "Cat got your tongue now, huh?" Brody taunted, glancing in the mirror. "Not so tough without your fancy car." The man shifted slightly. "Officer Miller, badge number 4, 922, Precinct 18. "Yeah, you memorizing it for your diary?" "No," the man said. "I'm memorizing it for your resignation letter." Brody slammed on the brakes at a red light, jarring the man forward. "You threaten me again, and you won't make it to the cells." "It's not a threat," the man replied, his voice level. "It is a procedural certainty." Beside him, O'Malley was furiously typing on the cruiser's laptop. She had run the name again. She felt the blood drain from her face. "Brody," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Brody, look at the screen." "Not now. I'm driving." "Brody, you have to look," she hissed. He glanced over at the rugged Panasonic display. The name associated with the vehicle registration was highlighted in bold. Owner Calloway, Nathaniel P., Title Chief Justice, Illinois Superior Court, flags judicial immunity / high priority. Brody squinted. He read it once. He read it twice. So, Brody scoffed, though a small knot of cold dread began to form in his stomach. So he's a judge, probably some traffic court nobody. Doesn't give him the right to disobey a lawful order. "Brody," O'Malley said, turning to look at the man in the back seat with wide eyes. Nathaniel Calloway isn't a traffic judge. He's the judge, the one who just put the governor's nephew in prison, the one who is heading the police accountability task force. The silence in the car became deafening. Brody looked in the rearview mirror again. The man Judge Nathaniel Calloway offered a small, dry smile. "I see Officer O'Malley has caught up," Calloway said. "Keep driving. Officer Miller, I'm eager to see how you process the Chief Justice of the Superior Court into a holding cell for a flat tire." Brody's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He had two choices. He could apologize, turn around, and beg for mercy. Or he could double down. Brody was a bully, and bullies only know one direction. "You think a title scares me?" Brody spat, though his voice wavered for the first time. "Judges break the law too. You assaulted me. That's my story. And in this town, it's a cop's word against a criminal's." "A criminal," Calloway mused. Interesting choice of words. I wonder if the captain will agree when he sees the dash cam footage. "Who says the dash cam was on?" Brody growled. "I did," O'Malley said from the passenger seat. Brody's head snapped toward her. "What?" "I turned it on manually when we exited the vehicle," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's all recorded. Brody, the stop, the wrench, the slap." Brody stared at her, betrayal burning in his eyes, but there was no time to argue. They were pulling into the station, Sally Port. The heavy steel gates rolled up with a groan. "You better keep your mouth shut." "Rookie," Brody hissed. "Too late," Judge Calloway said from the back. "The show is just beginning." The automatic doors of the 18th District Station slid open, bringing with them a gust of cold, wet wind. Brody shoved Judge Calloway forward, marching him through the lobby like a trophy hunter dragging a carcass. The precinct was busy, phones ringing, drunks shouting in the holding area, the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Move it," Brody barked, parading Calloway past the front desk. He wanted eyes on this. He wanted to establish his narrative before O'Malley could open her mouth. Assault on a police officer, resisting arrest. Heads turned. Officers drinking coffee paused mid-sip. A few civilians waiting to file reports looked up nervously. They saw a man in a ruined, wet Italian suit, hands cuffed behind his back, with a rapidly darkening bruise swelling on his cheekbone. And they saw Officer Brody Miller, chest puffed out, looking manic. "Booking," Brody announced, shoving Calloway toward the high desk where Sergeant Higgins sat. Higgins was a dinosaur of the department, 30 years on the job, close to retirement, and tired of everyone's nonsense. Higgins looked over his reading glasses. He looked at the wet, muddy prisoner. Then he looked at Brody. "What's this?" "Miller," "You drag in a banker for jaywalking?" Higgins asked, his voice gravelly. "Guy thinks he's tough," Brody said, slapping Calloway's leather wallet onto the counter. "Pulled a weapon on a traffic stop. Took a swing at me." "A weapon?" Higgins raised an eyebrow. "What weapon? Tire iron." Brody lied without blinking. "Had to subdue him." Judge Calloway stood perfectly still. He didn't scream. He didn't argue. He just looked at Sergeant Higgins. "Good evening. Sergeant, I believe we met at the Police Benevolent Association dinner last year. You were receiving an award for 3 decades of service." Higgins froze. He squinted, leaning closer. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. His face went from bored to horrified in a split second. "Holy," Higgins muttered. He snatched the wallet Brody had thrown, flipping it open. He didn't need to look at the ID, but he did anyway. His hands started to shake. "Miller?" Higgins whispered, his voice trembling. "Do you know who this is?" "Yeah, I know who he says he is," Brody scoffed, leaning his elbow on the counter. "Some judge. Thinks that gets him a free pass on assaulting a cop." Higgins stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the filing cabinets. "Uncuff him! Now!" "What?" Brody frowned. "Sarge. He assaulted me. I'm processing him." "I said uncuff him, you moron!" Higgins roared, his face turning red. The entire booking room went silent. "This is Judge Nathaniel Calloway. He signs the warrants for this entire district. He's having dinner with the commissioner next week." Brody rolled his eyes. "Sarge, relax. He's just another perp tonight. I don't care if he's the Pope. He swung at me. I'm putting him in the tank." Brody grabbed Calloway by the collar again, ignoring his superior's order. "Come on. Your Honor, let's see how you handle the general population. We got a couple of guys in there tonight who I think you sentenced last month. Maybe you can catch up." It was a death threat, pure and simple. Putting a judge in a holding cell with criminals he might have convicted was a sentence to a beating, or worse. "Miller, stop." Higgins reached for his phone, frantically dialing the captain's direct line. But Brody was already dragging Calloway toward the holding cells. He swiped his keycard. The heavy buzzer sounded. "Officer O'Malley," Calloway said calmly over his shoulder as he was pushed toward the steel bars. He caught the eye of the rookie who was standing by the entrance, looking terrified. "The clock is ticking." O'Malley looked at Brody, then at the judge. She made a choice. She turned on her heel and sprinted toward the administrative hallway, bypassing the sergeant and heading straight for the captain's office. Brody opened the cell door. Inside, 3 men sat on concrete benches. 1 was passed out. 2 looked up, their eyes hard and predatory. "Fresh meat," Brody announced to the cell. "And guess what? He's a judge." He shoved Calloway inside and slammed the gate. "Have fun." Brody smiled. Calloway stumbled slightly but caught his balance. He adjusted his wet coat. He turned to the 2 conscious inmates. They stood up, sensing weakness, sensing a target. "You a judge?" one of the inmates asked, cracking his knuckles. He was a giant of a man with tattoos climbing up his neck. Calloway looked him in the eye. "I am, and if I recall, Mr. Henderson, I showed you leniency on your possession charge 2 years ago because you had a sick daughter. How is she?" The giant froze, the aggression drained out of his face, replaced by confusion and then recognition. Judge Calloway. "Hello, Marcus," Calloway said, dusting off his lapel. "I appear to be in a bit of a predicament. I would appreciate it if you would ensure I am not disturbed while I wait for my release." The giant turned to the other inmate. "Sit down. Nobody touches him." Outside the bars, Brody's smile faded. He expected fear. He expected screaming. Instead, the man was holding court in a jail cell. "Enjoy it while it lasts," Brody muttered, turning to leave. "I've got paperwork to do." He didn't make it 5 steps. Captain Richard Walsh was a man who hated surprises. He was trying to finish his budget report when his office door flew open without a knock. He looked up, ready to chew out whoever it was. But he stopped when he saw Officer Martha O'Malley. She was pale, dripping wet, and hyperventilating. O'Malley. "What the hell is going on?" "Captain," she gasped. "You have to come downstairs. Now! I'm busy. Rookie. Whatever it is. Tell Higgins." "It's Brody," she said, her voice cracking. "He arrested Judge Calloway." Walsh dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the desk. "He did what? He arrested Chief Justice Nathaniel Calloway for a flat tire. He slapped him. Captain, he slapped the judge in the face, and now he put him in the general population cell." Walsh didn't say a word. He didn't ask if she was sure. The look of absolute horror in her eyes told him everything. He stood up, grabbed his hat, and moved faster than he had in 20 years. Down in the booking area, Brody was whistling. He was filling out the arrest report, checking boxes, resisting, assault, disorderly. He was enjoying the creative writing. The double doors to the admin hallway banged open with enough force to crack the plaster. Captain Walsh stormed into the room. He wasn't walking. He was marching with the fury of a god. Sergeant Higgins was standing behind the desk, looking like he wanted to vanish. "Miller!" Walsh screamed. Brody jumped, dropping his pen. "Captain, just wrapping up a... keys." Walsh held out his hand. His face was a shade of purple that suggested an imminent stroke. "Sir, give me the damn keys to the cell." Walsh didn't wait. He snatched the keyring from Brody's belt, nearly ripping the leather loop. Walsh ran to the holding cell. He jammed the key into the lock and threw the door open. Inside, Judge Calloway was sitting on the concrete bench, discussing the state of the Chicago school system with the inmate named Marcus. "Judge Calloway," Walsh said, his voice breathless. "Your Honor, I am so incredibly sorry. Please, step out." Calloway looked up slowly. He didn't rush. He stood up, smoothed his suit, and nodded to the inmate. "Keep your nose clean." "Marcus." "Yes, sir," the inmate said. Calloway stepped out of the cell. The bruise on his face was now purple and swollen, a stark contrast to his calm demeanor. He looked at Captain Walsh. "Richard," Calloway said, "it's been a while." "It has. Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Get the medics." Walsh shouted to the room. "Someone get an ice pack. Get a chair." "I don't need ice," Calloway said, his voice hardening. "I need your officer's badge." Brody was standing by the booking desk, looking confused. He still didn't get it. He walked over, trying to salvage the situation. "Captain, you don't understand," Brody said, pointing a finger at Calloway. "This guy, he was aggressive. He refused a lawful order. You can't just let him out because he's a judge. The law is the law." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Calloway turned to Brody. He walked until he was inches from the officer's face. "Officer Miller," Calloway said softly, "do you know what is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in Chamber B of the Superior Court?" "No," Brody spat, "and I don't care. It is the review board for the sergeant's exam and promotion appeals," Calloway said. "I believe you have an application in. You've been trying to make sergeant for, what, 6 years. Brody went cold. He did have an appeal in. It was his last chance before he aged out of the promotion track. I am the chair of that board, Calloway revealed. I was reading your file in my car before my tire blew. I was actually going to recommend you. I thought your record showed persistence. Brody's mouth opened, but no sound came out. But now, Calloway continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a gunshot. I have witnessed your policing firsthand. You are a bully. Officer Miller, you are a liar, and you are a disgrace to the uniform that Captain Walsh wears. That's bias, Brody stammered, panic finally setting in. You can't judge me now. Conflict of interest. Oh, I won't be judging your promotion. Miller, Calloway said, I'll be the primary witness at your criminal trial. Criminal. Brody laughed nervously, looking at the captain for backup. Captain, tell him I followed protocol. Captain Walsh stepped forward. He reached out and ripped the badge off Brody's chest. The Velcro tore with a loud, final rip. Brody Miller, Walsh said, his voice shaking with rage. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You can't do that. The union. I don't care about the union, Walsh roared, getting in Brody's face. You assaulted a federal judge, you falsified a police report, and you did it all on camera. Walsh pointed to O'Malley. O'Malley, pull the dash cam footage. Burn 2 copies. 1 for me, 1 for the district attorney. Yes, sir, O'Malley said, her voice steady. And Miller. Walsh pointed to the holding cell Calloway had just vacated. Get in. What? Brody stepped back. No way. You can't put me in there. That's General Pop. They'll kill me. You put a Chief Justice in there 5 minutes ago, Walsh said coldly. If it's safe enough for him, it's safe enough for you. Captain, please, Brody begged. The arrogance finally stripped away, revealing the coward underneath. Marcus is in there. I arrested Marcus. He hates me. Then you better hope he has a forgiving heart, Calloway interjected. Cuff him, Walsh ordered Sergeant Higgins. Higgins moved with pleasure. He spun Brody around. The metallic click of the handcuffs sounded much louder this time. You have the right to remain silent, Higgins grunted. I suggest you use it. As Brody was dragged toward the cell, kicking and screaming, pleading for his life, Judge Calloway turned to Captain Walsh. Richard, I want my phone call now. Of course, Your Honor. Who are you calling your lawyer? Calloway checked his watch. No, I'm calling the mayor. He's expecting me for a drink, and I'd hate to tell him I'm late because his officers were too busy assaulting the judiciary. Brody was thrown into the cell. The gate slammed shut. Inside, Marcus the Giant stood up again. He cracked his knuckles, looking at the man who had harassed his neighborhood for a decade. Well, Marcus smiled. Look who it is. Brody pressed his face against the bars. Captain Judge, please don't leave me in here. Calloway didn't look back. He walked toward the exit, the captain opening the door for him. This isn't over. Richard, Calloway said as he stepped back into the rainy night. Tomorrow, the real storm begins. The steel bars of the holding cell hummed with the vibration of the slamming gate. Brody Miller gripped the cold metal, his face pressed between the bars, watching the backs of his colleagues retreat down the hallway. Captain Higgins, you can't do this, Brody screamed, his voice cracking into a desperate sob. I'm a cop, I'm one of you. The heavy door at the end of the corridor clicked shut, sealing the noise of the station out. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the dripping of a leaky pipe and the shallow, terrified breathing of the man who had been the predator only an hour ago. Brody slowly turned around. Marcus, the giant inmate with the tattoos climbing his neck like ivy, was sitting on the bench. He wasn't moving. He was just watching. The other inmate, a wiry man named Leo, who Brody had arrested for petty theft 3 times, was standing by the toilet, grinning. I have a gun, Brody bluffed, patting his empty hip. Don't try anything, Marcus laughed. It was a rumbling sound that bounced off the concrete walls. You ain't got nothing. Miller, no badge, no gun, no backup. Just you and the people you stepped on. Brody backed into the corner, his hands raised. Look, Marcus, no hard feelings. Right, it's just the job. I was just doing my job. Marcus stood up. He towered over Brody, blocking out the dim overhead light. Your job. Was it your job to plant that bag of weed in my pocket 2 years ago? Was it your job to laugh when I told you I'd lose my custody rights? I didn't. Brody stammered. Don't lie, Marcus whispered, leaning in close enough that Brody could smell the stale coffee on his breath. Judges and lawyers, they need proof. In here, we know the truth. Brody squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the fist. He flinched as Marcus raised a hand, but the blow didn't come. Marcus reached out and gently patted Brody's cheek, the exact spot where Calloway had been bruised. It was a patronizing, humiliating pat. I ain't gonna touch you, Marcus said, stepping back with a look of disgust. You ain't worth the extra time. Besides, watching you shake like a little kid, that's better than beating you. Marcus sat back down and closed his eyes. You sit in that corner. Miller, you don't sleep. You don't talk. You just think about how long a 10-year sentence feels. Because that's where you're going. Brody slid down the wall, pulling his knees to his chest. For the next 6 hours. He didn't move. Every time he drifted off, the sound of a key turning or a toilet flushing jolted him awake in a cold sweat. He was stripped of his armor, stripped of his power, and for the first time in his life, he felt exactly what his victims felt helpless. Meanwhile, upstairs, the 18th precinct was in meltdown. Captain Walsh had turned his office into a war room. The district attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Vance Waite. No, generic name. Let's use Sylvia Thorne, had arrived at 3 a.m. in a trench coat, looking furious. Walk me through it again. Walsh, Sylvia said, pacing the floor. And tell me you didn't lose the footage. It's here, Walsh said, pointing to the monitor. Officer O'Malley secured it. O'Malley sat in the corner, holding a cup of lukewarm water. She had been giving statements to Internal Affairs for 2 hours. She was exhausted, but she felt lighter than she had in months. The secret she'd been keeping that Brody was a monster was finally out. Walsh pressed play. On the screen, the rainy tunnel appeared. They watched Brody scream. They watched him escalate. And then, in high-definition audio and video, they saw the slap, smack. That, Judge Calloway said on the recording, was the most expensive mistake of your life. Sylvia Thorne winced. Jesus, he didn't just slap him. He pistol-whipped the Constitution. There's more, Walsh said grimly. We ran an audit on Miller's logs for the last 6 months after Calloway left. We found discrepancies, missing cash from drug busts, body cams malfunctioning during arrests. This stop wasn't a fluke. It was a pattern. Sylvia looked at the screen where Brody was dragging the judge to the car. Calloway called me 10 minutes ago, she said. He's not just pressing assault charges. He's filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. He's going after the department's qualified immunity. He wants Miller's pension, his badge, and his freedom. He'll get it, Walsh muttered. He wants something else, too, Sylvia said, pausing. What? He wants Miller present at the 9:00 a.m. promotion hearing, she said. He says since Miller wanted to be a sergeant so badly, he should attend the board meeting. That's cruel, Walsh said. Miller is in a cell, Calloway insisted. He wants Miller to see exactly what he threw away. Sylvia buttoned her coat. Clean him up, Walsh. Put him in a suit if you have to, but get him to the courthouse by 9:00. The morning sun broke over Chicago, harsh and bright, contrasting with the gloomy rain of the previous night. Brody Miller was pulled out of his cell at 7:30 a.m. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red-rimmed. His uniform was wrinkled and stained with sweat, and he smelled of fear. Shower, Sergeant Higgins ordered, tossing him a towel and a bar of soap. You got caught? Am I being arraigned? Brody asked, his voice hoarse. Worse, Higgins said. You're going to your promotion interview. Brody froze. A flicker of delusional hope sparked in his chest. Maybe the union rep fixed it. Maybe Calloway cooled down. Judges were politicians. After all, maybe they wanted to hush this up to avoid a scandal. Really, Brody asked. Just get dressed, Miller, Higgins said, hiding a look of pity. An hour later, Brody was handcuffed and placed in the back of a transport van, not a cruiser. He was driven to the Superior Court building. He was led through the back entrance, avoiding the swarm of news vans that had already gathered out front. Leaked footage judge assaulted by CPD. The chyron on the lobby TV read. Brody swallowed hard. The hope vanished. He was marched into Chamber B. It was a grand room with mahogany walls and high ceilings. Usually, this room was used for ceremonial events or high-level disciplinary hearings. Today, it was packed. In the gallery sat the police commissioner, the mayor's chief of staff, and 3 representatives from the police union who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. At the front of the room sat the review board, 5 seats. 4 were occupied by high-ranking officials. The center seat, the chairman's seat, was empty. Brody was guided to a small wooden table in the center of the room. His handcuffs were removed, but 2 bailiffs stood directly behind him. He felt naked without his gun belt. All rise, the bailiff announced. The side door opened. Judge Nathaniel Calloway walked in. He looked impeccable. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Brody's annual salary, but the image was marred, or perhaps enhanced by the dark, purple and black bruise that covered the entire left side of his face. His lip was swollen. The silence in the room was absolute. Calloway didn't look at the audience. He walked to the center chair, sat down, and opened a file. He adjusted his glasses, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his bruised cheek. He looked down at Brody. Officer Brody Miller, Calloway began, his voice amplified by the microphone. We are here today to discuss your application for the rank of sergeant. Brody looked around nervously. Your Honor, I need a lawyer. This is not a criminal trial, Mr. Miller, Calloway said calmly. This is an administrative hearing regarding your employment. You waived your right to counsel for administrative reviews when you signed your union contract. Unless, of course, you wish to resign right now. Brody clenched his jaw. Resigning meant losing his pension immediately. If he fought it, maybe the union could save something. I don't resign. Very well. Calloway picked up a piece of paper. I have reviewed your file. 15 years. Commendations for marksmanship. Complaints for excessive force. 32. The gallery murmured. 32 complaints was an astronomical number. "Most were dismissed," Brody blurted out. "Unfounded." "Dismissed because there was no video evidence," Calloway corrected. "Until last night." Calloway pressed a button. A large projection screen descended behind him. "This board has received new evidence regarding your suitability for leadership," Calloway said. The screen didn't show the slap. Everyone had seen the slap. Instead, the screen showed grainy footage from a convenience store security camera dated 3 months prior. It showed Brody's patrol car. It showed Brody talking to a young teenager. It showed Brody taking a wad of cash from the kid's pocket and putting it into his own vest, then driving away. Brody gasped. That's taken out of context. I was confiscating proceeds of a crime." "There is no log of that cash in evidence," Calloway said, flipping a page. "We checked." Another video played, this one from a body cam that Brody thought was off. It showed him calling a Hispanic driver a racial slur and laughing with his partner. And finally, Calloway said, "Last night," the slap played on the big screen. The sound echoed in the chamber. Smack. Calloway touched his own face, unconsciously. "Officer Miller," Calloway said, leaning forward, "you applied for a promotion because you believe you are a leader. You believe you set the standard." Calloway stood up. "The sad truth is, you did set a standard. You set the standard for everything that is rotting this department from the inside out." "I made a mistake," Brody shouted, standing up. The bailiffs put heavy hands on his shoulders to sit him down. "I didn't know who you were. It was dark. I thought you were a threat." "And that," Calloway thundered, his voice rising for the first time, "is the problem. You didn't know who I was. So you treated me like an animal. If I had been a plumber, or a teacher, or a mechanic, you would have gotten away with it. You thought my dignity depended on my title. But dignity is a human right, officer, not a privilege for the powerful." Calloway looked at the other board members. "Votes?" "Deny," the deputy chief said. "Deny," the civilian oversight representative said. "Deny," the human resources director said. Calloway looked back at Brody. "The application for sergeant is denied. But we aren't done." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the room opened. 4 men in suits walked in. They wore FBI windbreakers. Brody's blood ran cold. "Officer Miller," Calloway said, closing the file. "While looking into your history last night, the district attorney found something interesting. It seems the evidence found in the trunks of 3 suspects you arrested last year had the exact same batch number. You've been recycling drugs to boost your arrest stats." Brody shook his head frantically. No, that's a lie. The Federal Bureau of Investigation disagrees," Calloway said. "This is no longer a local matter. It is a federal racketeering case." Calloway banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. "Hearing adjourned. Officers, he is all yours." The FBI agents moved in. They didn't use standard handcuffs. They used shackles, waist chains, and leg irons. They clicked them on Brody in front of the commissioner, in front of the cameras, in front of the world, as they dragged him out. Brody looked back at the bench. He locked eyes with Calloway. "You ruined my life," Brody screamed. Calloway didn't shout back. He simply leaned into the microphone one last time. "You are mistaken, Mr. Miller. You ruined it yourself. I just turned the lights on." The wheels of justice turned slowly, but when they finally crush, they grind exceedingly fine. For 6 months, the city of Chicago held its breath. The case of United States versus... Brody Miller had transcended a simple assault charge. It had become a referendum on power, accountability, and the thin blue line. The video of the slap had been viewed over 50 million times globally, dissected by cable news pundits, and screamed about in protest marches. But for Brody Miller, the world had shrunk to the dimensions of an 8 by 10 isolation cell in the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The swagger was gone. The bulk he had carried like armor had melted away, leaving him gaunt and hollow-eyed. The silence of solitary confinement necessary for his own protection from the general population had eaten away at his mind. He spent his days pacing, rehearsing speeches to a jury that wasn't there, and waiting for letters from his wife that never came. She had filed for divorce 30 days after his arrest, taking the kids to her sisters in Ohio. Brody was alone. He had no badge. He had no family. He had no brotherhood, the fraternal order of police, usually so quick to defend their own, had cut him loose the moment the federal racketeering charges dropped. He was radioactive. The day of reckoning, the final day of the trial, arrived on a sweltering July morning. The humidity in the courtroom was stifling, heavy with the scent of wet wool suits and nervous sweat. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The gallery was a sea of faces: community activists, reporters, victims of Brody's past, policing, and in the front row, sitting with the posture of a granite statue, was Judge Nathaniel Calloway. Beside him sat Captain Walsh and Officer Martha O'Malley. When the bailiffs led Brody in, a ripple of shock went through the room. He looked like a ghost in an oversized orange jumpsuit. He didn't scan the room for support. He knew there was none. He kept his eyes on the floor, shuffling in his shackles. His defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Mr. Klein, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, patted Brody's arm. It was a gesture of pity, not confidence. The defense had been a disaster. Their strategy claiming Brody was suffering from urban combat stress and that Calloway had provoked the incident had fallen apart under the withering cross-examination of District Attorney Sylvia Thorne. But the final nail in the coffin hadn't been the video. It had been the testimony of Officer Martha O'Malley. 2 days prior, O'Malley had taken the stand. The defense had tried to break her. They called her a traitor. They called her a rat. They asked if she was only testifying to get a promotion. O'Malley had looked the jury in the eye and said, "I am testifying because I took an oath. That oath was to the Constitution, not to Brody Miller." When he struck Judge Calloway, he didn't just hit a man. He betrayed every officer who does this job the right way. That statement had sealed Brody's fate. The verdict now. The jury was back. The foreman, a retired school teacher with stern glasses, stood up. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Elena Rodriguez asked. She was known as the Iron Lady of the Northern District, a woman who had no patience for corruption. "We have, Your Honor." Brody closed his eyes. "Please," he prayed. "Please, just simple assault, maybe probation. I can rebuild." On count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, the foreman read. "We find the defendant guilty." Brody flinched. On count 2, falsification of police records. Guilty. On count 3 through 7, federal racketeering and conspiracy. Guilty. On count 8, assault on a federal officer. Guilty. Every guilty was a physical blow. 8 counts. A clean sweep. Brody's head dropped to the table. He felt a ringing in his ears, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the gasps from the gallery. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel to silence the room. "The jury is dismissed with the court's thanks. We will proceed immediately to sentencing." Mr. Klein stood up. desperate. Your Honor, we request a recess. We need time to prepare. You have had 6 months. Counselor. Judge Rodriguez snapped. The evidence is overwhelming. The damage to the public trust is catastrophic. I see no reason to delay. She turned her gaze to Brody. It was a look of absolute, freezing judgment. Mr. Miller, please stand. Brody scrambled to his feet, his chains rattling. He gripped the table to stop his legs from giving out. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? This was it. The moment he had practiced in his cell. The moment to show remorse, to be human. Brody licked his dry lips. He looked at the judge, then slowly turned to look at Nathaniel Calloway. Calloway met his gaze, his face unreadable. Brody's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. I just want to say, I was stressed. You don't know what it's like out there. The streets, they change you. I didn't know who he was. If I had known he was a judge, I never would have. Stop. Judge Rodriguez interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Brody cold. That, she said, leaning over the bench, is the most damning thing you could have possibly said. The courtroom went dead silent. You are sorry because of who he was. Rodriguez continued, her voice rising with controlled fury. You are sorry because he had the power to fight back. If that had been a janitor, or a student, or a single mother changing that tire, you wouldn't be standing here apologizing. You would be laughing about it in a bar, Brody stammered. No, Your Honor, You treated your badge not as a symbol of service, but as a hunting license. She cut him off. You preyed on the weak. You planted evidence to boost your career. And when you finally met someone with dignity who stood up to you, you resorted to violence because you are a bully. Mr. Miller, and the law has no place for bullies. She picked up the sentencing file. The paper rustled loudly in the microphone. Brody Miller, for the charge of civil rights violations. I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison. Brody let out a small whimper. 10 years. He would be 55 when he got out. However, the judge continued, given the severity of the racketeering charges and the systematic nature of your corruption, I am sentencing you to an additional 15 years for counts 3 through 7. 15! Brody gasped. Your Honor, please. These sentences are to run consecutively. She delivered the final blow. 25 years. The air left the room. 25 years. It was effectively a life sentence. He would die in prison, or come out an old, broken man with nothing left. 25 years, Brody screamed, the reality shattering his composure. I'm a cop, you can't do this. Put me in General Pop and they'll kill me. You're signing my death warrant. You signed your own warrant the night you decided you were above the law, Judge Rodriguez said, banging the gavel with a sound like a gunshot. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the U.S. Marshals. Get him out of my sight. The collapse panic, raw and animalistic, took over. As 2 burly marshals moved in to grab him, Brody Miller, the man who had terrified a neighborhood for a decade, broke down completely. He dropped to his knees, sobbing loudly, ugly sounds of desperation bubbling from his throat. Captain Walsh, he screamed, looking at his former boss. Help me, Rich. Please, I'm one of you. Captain Walsh didn't blink. He just stared, his face hard as stone. Judge Calloway, Brody shrieked as the marshals hauled him up by his armpits. I'm sorry, don't let them take me. Calloway didn't look away. He watched the man who had slapped him, the man who had tried to humiliate him. He felt no joy, only a heavy, solemn sadness. "I'm a cop," Brody wailed, his feet dragging across the floor as they pulled him toward the side door. "I am the law. I am the law." The side door slammed shut, cutting off his screams instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing with the echoes of a life destroyed. The aftermath outside the courthouse, the summer storm that had threatened all morning, finally broke. But it wasn't a violent downpour, it was a cleansing rain, washing the dust off the city streets. Judge Nathaniel Calloway walked down the marble steps, flanked by Captain Walsh and the newly promoted Lieutenant Martha O'Malley. A swarm of reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out like spears. "Judge Calloway! Judge Calloway!" a reporter from Channel 5 shouted. "Brody Miller got 25 years. Do you feel like justice was served?" Calloway stopped. He adjusted his trench coat. He looked at the reporter, then at the camera lens. "Justice," Calloway said, his voice deep and resonant, "is not about the number of years a man spends in a cell. Justice is about the restoration of trust." He turned to look at O'Malley. She looked different now. The uncertainty of the rookie was gone, replaced by a steel spine and a gaze that saw everything. She wore her new lieutenant's bars with a quiet pride. "The system is only as good as the people within it," Calloway continued. "For a long time, this city was policed by men like Brody Miller, men who ruled by fear. But today, the system worked. Not because of me, but because of her." He placed a hand on O'Malley's shoulder. Lieutenant O'Malley risked her career, her safety, and her reputation to tell the truth. She broke the blue wall of silence. As long as we have officers like her, there is hope for this city. O'Malley blushed, lowering her head slightly. "I just did my job, Your Honor." "No," Calloway said softly, so only she could hear. "You did more than your job, Martha. You saved the soul of your precinct." Captain Walsh checked his watch. "Lieutenant, we have a shift briefing in an hour. You're leading it?" "Yes, sir." She nodded. As O'Malley and Walsh walked toward their cruiser, Calloway stayed on the steps for a moment longer. He watched the police car pull away, its lights off, merging into the traffic of the city. He reached up and touched his left cheek. The bruise was long gone, healed by time, but the memory was there. It served as a reminder that authority is fragile, a reminder that dignity must be defended. He walked to his car, a modest, new sedan. The vintage Mercedes 560 SL was at home, under a tarp. He wouldn't drive it for a while. It attracted too much attention. As he unlocked his door, a young patrol officer, fresh out of the academy, was walking the beat nearby. He saw the judge and froze, looking nervous. "Good afternoon, Your Honor," the young officer stammered, saluting awkwardly. Calloway paused. He looked at the kid scared, eager, wearing a uniform that was still too stiff. Calloway smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile. "Good afternoon, officer," Calloway said. "Stay dry out there. And remember." The officer leaned in. "Sir." "Treat everyone you meet like they're the Chief Justice," Calloway said, his eyes twinkling with a hard-won wisdom. "Because one day, they might be." Calloway got into his car and drove off into the rain, leaving the young officer standing there, thinking about the weight of the badge on his chest. The story of Officer Brody Miller serves as a chilling reminder that power reveals character. It does not create it. For 15 years, Brody operated in the shadows, believing he was untouchable. He mistook fear for respect and silence for consent. He thought the badge on his chest made him a king, when it was supposed to make him a servant. His downfall didn't come from a shootout or a high-speed chase. It came from his own arrogance. It came from the assumption that a black man changing a tire in the rain was beneath him. That singular moment of prejudice blinded him to the reality standing right in front of him. Brody Miller is currently serving his sentence at the USP Terre Haute, a high-security federal facility. He spends 23 hours a day in a protective custody wing, isolated from the very criminals he once helped put away. He has 24 years left. Martha O'Malley is now the youngest captain in the history of the 18th Precinct. She heads the Internal Integrity Task Force, teaching new recruits that loyalty belongs to the truth, not to the person standing next to you. And Judge Nathaniel Calloway, he continues to preside over the Superior Court. He is known as a fair judge, a harsh sentencer of corrupt officials, and a man who never, ever forgets a face. And that is the story of how one moment of arrogance destroyed a 20-year career. It's a story about karma, yes, but it's also a story about integrity. Brody Miller thought he was the law. He forgot that the law applies to everyone, especially those who enforce it. He thought he was slapping a helpless victim, but he was really slapping the face of justice itself. And as we saw, justice hit back. Hard. I want to ask you a question. Put yourself in Officer O'Malley's shoes. You're a rookie. You're scared. Your partner, a veteran, tells you to shut up and follow his lead. Do you have the courage to turn on that camera? Do you have the courage to speak up when everyone else is staying silent? It's not an easy choice, but as Lieutenant O'Malley proved, it's the only choice that matters. If this story moved you, or if you believe that justice was finally served. Please hit that like button. It helps us share these important stories with more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a lot more stories coming about real-life karma, twists of fate, and the moments that change everything. Do you think 25 years was a fair sentence for Brody Miller, or did the punishment not fit the crime? I read every comment. And I want to know what you think. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, treat people with respect, and remember, you never know who you're talking to.